The past decade has seen the growth of the BRICS cooperation platform into an influential international mechanism and has helped bring changes to global economic governance. While setbacks in globalization and internal frictions among member countries might dominate the occasion, many still expect the upcoming BRICS summit in Xiamen to provide a pragmatic framework for the 5 members to overcome challenges in their economy, society, and politics. Today, I'm joined by Professor M.D. Nalapad from Manipur University, India, Daniel de Oliveira Vasconcelos, and Bolanini Gili. Both are Yenching scholars from Peking University. We shall also talk to Pavel Falkenhor, defense analyst in Russia via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray.
The BRICS mechanism was set up in 2006 and refers to 5 major emerging national economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Today, the BRICS countries account for 26% of the Earth's territory, about 43% of the world's population, and nearly 30% of global GDP. Over the past decade, the BRICS nations have contributed to more than half of the world's economic growth. Since 2009, leaders of the 5 nations have been meeting annually at former summits. In 2014, the BRICS states signed an agreement to establish what is now called the New Development Bank, with reserves worth $100 billion. The bank is tasked with supporting projects that are socially, environmentally, and economically sustainable. In 2016, BRICS agreed to strengthen joint security efforts and issued a joint statement condemning terrorism.
Gentlemen, welcome to a special program devoted to the upcoming BRICS summit in Xiamen. Now, do you think with the 70 days standoff coming to an end in Doklam, the presence of your Prime Minister Modi will at least be symbolically a success of this very important international event to be hosted by China?
Well, I'd like to say that as important as the standoff was the peaceful way it was resolved. And I'd like to point out that, I mean, even during this period of what we called very high tension, there was never any shot fired between the Indian and the Chinese forces. In fact, not at all. So I would like to say that Doklam is an example of tension, yes, but also of a way of ensuring that this tension did not get into the situation of any kind of conflict. And the reality of the situation is both India and China know that these 2 ancient civilizations should not enter into a conflict with each other. So I would like to say that yes, it's a very happy event that the Doklam issue has been settled, and I'm very confident that my Prime Minister will come to Xiamen with a lot of very constructive proposals as to how BRICS can be strengthened.
Do you think this is a big relief for other observers from Africa, Brazil, for example, to see that Doklam fails to steal the spotlight of the center stage of a BRICS summit in Xiamen?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's very important for us, for example, from Brazil, to understand the situation as a space where we can try to find mutual understanding. And Doklam standoff showed that, at least in this side, BRICS was a forum that approached and approximated China, India, and I think without BRICS, I think it would be worse, the situation.
As what the professor somewhat stressed was the fact that this particular episode or incident, or what some might even call tension, actively does provide not necessarily an opportunity to recognize tension, but more than anything, an opportunity for cooperation. And so going forward, we recognize that there can be cooperation within the BRIC nations, and that this kind of form of cooperation can also set example for the future, for potential conflict, but more than anything, resolution.
There's no question about this representation. For example, China is the 2nd biggest economy, India is fast catching up, and the most populous democracy. So in many ways, these 2 giants in Asia represent the dynamics of the world economy and perhaps prospects of a new world economic and political order. However, by the end of the day, we would ask ourselves whether these 5 member states of BRICS are able to represent all of the other catch-up economies. I would like to start with Brazil.
Yeah, I think BRICS has a important stake here in global affairs because they are all countries that had a historical path of, I don't know, except for Russia, but a path of colonialism that affect our countries. And we have a message to the world, I guess. And if countries agree with us, I guess we can be the voice of these developed nations.
Let me go to Pavel Fagenhor for his insightful analysis about the prospects and dynamics, if any, of BRICS. Pavel, there's a popular assumption here that President Putin has actually played a pivotal role in cementing the solidarity, if any, of the BRICS member states. Ever since the annexation of Crimea, and after Russia was kicked out of G8. So do you believe it is the vision of your president who has proactively helped bring these major economies together to address issues about developing countries, or what we call the South-South cooperation?
Well, yes, Moscow very much would want to kind of strengthen the BRICS bloc into a bloc, kind of an anti-NATO something that could oppose or counterbalance, I would say, the West and the United States. Of course, the problem is that the other members of BRICS are not very keen on that. And of course, the economic agenda that China is promoting. China is right now the champion of free trade in the world. And many BRICS nations will, of course, support that. But Russia, most likely not very much, because we're in the process of import replacement, as we call it, which is more kind of protectionist. So that's a big problem, that BRICS is so kind of diverse that it acting on... Of course, there's going to be a wonderful summit. They'll sign declarations. But actually acting all together, it's very hard because there is no common denominator, I would say.
Well, our friend from South Africa,
yeah.
The size of the Chinese economy is even bigger than the rest combined within the framework of BRICS. Yeah. Does it mean that China is ready to assume the leadership for the next stage of globalization during the absence of the United States? And secondly, do you think the rest of the world stands ready to accept China's, I mean, its proactive role in advancing the agenda of globalization?
Yeah, I think this is a centripetal particular question when we think about global from the government, from the obvious that, you know, with the petulant president thus far in the U.S., it has created somewhat of almost unstable or potentially less stable geopolitical arena. I would definitely from that say with the advance of China's prodigious economy, it does give it an opportunity to lead. But that kind of leadership must also look into itself and create necessarily room to acknowledge the more unique realities of other BRIC nations. So it is going to be leadership, but it's going to be leadership that comes with others rather than letting others sit behind the table. It should be leadership with everybody at the table.
Professor Nalapati, there's obviously no question about an opportunity on the table or on the doorstep of China for us to kind of assume some sort of a leadership. However, what does it take to qualify the world leader, not absolutely or necessarily at the cost of the U.S. retreat, quote unquote? American elites and the establishment of the United States refuse to retreat from the center stage.
Well, I'd like to point out that if China follows Chinese characteristics, it's going to be very successful. Now, you have followed policy with Chinese characteristics, and you've done an amazing job of reducing poverty. India has done the second best job after China of reducing hundreds of millions of people, removing them from poverty. So what I mean to say, new institutions that have been set up under BRICS and the Asian Infrastructure Bank, China has not given for itself the kind of powers which the United States gave to itself in the Bretton Woods conference regarding the World Bank, and the United States and Europe gave the IMF. There's been a much fairer distribution of power in these agencies. That is the Chinese way. I would not like to see China follow the Western way of trying to use, for example, dominance, or trying to use, for example, force. I think this is not the Chinese way. So long as China follows the Chinese way, I'm very confident that its across the world, the goodwill for China will rise significantly.
Well, thank you so much. Let me go back to Pavel. Do you think the ambitious blueprint of President Xi Jinping to use the Belt and Road Initiative in strengthening interconnectivity between China and the rest of the world will serve as an alternative to the Yalta framework that was first introduced at the end of the Second World War? And do you think our Belt and Road Initiative may play a supplementary role other than the Bretton Woods, which itself is highly questionable, don't you think so? Because Russia threatens to use an alternative world currency if the United States continues to use economic sanctions in punishing Russia for the alleged intervention with their domestic campaign.
Well, the world right now is not ready to have a real alternative for the dollar. That's economically impossible, and that would be a tremendous blow to the Chinese economy also. So I don't think that that is right now actually on the cards at all. As I say, Russia has a serious problem with the United States. It's not economic. Russian-American trade is negligible. It's a political and military problem. China is more concentrated on the economy, on leading the world economy, and actually opposing American present moves of isolationism and protectionism. And China is seeking, and most likely will find, allies in that. It's very important that Mexico, say, was invited to this summit, because Mexico, like China right now, is under threat of American Trump administration imposing tariffs, and that's a serious problem for both countries. For say, India, that is not a problem. So that means that the BRICS framework and even the summit may be used for very important bilateral, trilateral alliances, kind of alliances of convenience, because the differences between different countries of the third world are big, but that doesn't mean they can't act together on different kind of issues and maybe even act efficiently. But for that, they need a very kind of live connection. It should be fluid and well changing from issue to issue. And BRICS, and especially BRICS Plus, could give that framework.
With the strong and robust rise of in the consumption of shale gas, maybe Saudi Arabia, along with Russia, would be the first in the forefront, proactively seeking the use of an alternative reserve currency other than the US dollar in settling major energy transactions throughout the world. Venezuela is no exception. It's yet another oil-rich country. Having said this, the internationalization of RMB has remarkably slowed down, despite the inclusion of our currency in the basket of special drawing rights of the International Monetary Fund. Having said this, do you think the rest of the world would really look at the use of a euro, Japanese yen, British sterling, as well as RMB as very convincing alternative reserve currencies to somehow dilute our dependence on US dollar, which was separated from the gold standard in the early 1970s. And many would argue from then on, the US dollar has actually lost its importance as the only major world reserve currency. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think to me that this kind of question is a symptom to some of the larger questions that we actually have in terms of how will global leadership look like going into the, later on to the 21st century. Meaning that really what we're concerned with is, with this advent, is obviously that we're looking for opportunities that will ensure that everybody can participate from it equally and from it effectively. And so obviously with the dilution of the US from the dollar and the greater from the importance of RMB will place greater, really stress greater formative opportunities for everybody to participate further. That's including the euro, that's including Japanese yen and so forth. And it's saying something to my earlier point about looking for collective formative solutions that ensure that everybody is participating more effectively in the global arena. The problem of the previous formative regimes was not that the fact that the US or the West was participating, it was the fact that they were exclusively participating at the expense of others. And so in some way, what we're really talking about is ensuring that whatever solutions that come into the future is that they're inclusive solutions, solutions that will bring everybody up and not necessarily everybody or some up and then everybody down.
Now, consider that Latin America's largest economy, Daniel, Brazil, is still reeling from a recession that has left roughly 14 million people jobless, and the country is seeing some serious corruption scandals of its presidents in plural form. Will political uncertainty stop Brazilian President Temer from going forward with his ambitious economic agenda?
Yeah, that's the main issue in Brazil, I guess, right now, because, well, one part of the story are the economic bad choices that we made from the past years, and the other part of the story is the current political crisis that we're having in Brazil. And I think it's a kind of a standoff as well, that we don't have the parties, different parties, talking and dialoguing to each other, which is making the economy really slowly and not getting back to its track. So I think that Michel Temer now is trying to get an agenda of economic reform that is basically in austeric measures, and I believe that's not the way that we should do compared to, for example, impact negatively to, for example, the social welfare and unemployment, as you just said. So maybe in the short term, we won't see the economy reestablishing itself in Brazil, but maybe in 10 years or so.
Despite the skeptical gaze of a global audience, China is, of course, very happy hosting this upcoming BRICS summit in Xiamen. But whether this bloc, as Pavel Fogelhorn said wisely, is relevant, that's one of the big questions we're going to discuss after we come back. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. So, Professor Nalapat, what do you think of the issue of relevance for BRICS?
Well, I'd like to point out that nearly half the population of the world is going to meet in Xiamen in the person of their leaders. And I think nearly $20 trillion of GDP is going to be meeting at Xiamen. So quite frankly, it's only a matter of time, given the differential growth rates, when BRICS becomes more important than, for example, the G7 in terms of the rate of growth. It's only a matter of time. So I think, it's very important for us not to ourselves set low targets for BRICS. I mean, we have been conditioned by the previously powerful forces. We're talking about Yalta, Bretton Woods. Those individuals would like us to believe that BRICS is an irrelevance. And in my view, the leaders should go for major changes. For example, to think in terms of visa-free access to BRICS countries. Think in terms of allowing every BRICS currency to be freely convertible in every BRICS country. So if we go in for this kind of major changes and major policy changes, it creates, frankly, its own dynamic. You cannot rely on the existing dynamic. You have to change that. You need to take big leaps. And I would say on the question of visa relaxation, on the question of allowing each other's currency to be freely exchangeable in each other's country, these are big steps that can transform BRICS.
Pavel, the success or importance of a G7 is actually based on their ability to share the same values and perhaps a lot of similarity of their own culture in the West. However, when you take a second look at the relevance of BRICS, 5 member countries of this bloc, you feel a little bit confused, if not puzzled, as to whether the diversity of their values and political institutions would help cement their solidarity, will feature the prominence of this bloc. What do you think?
Well, the diversity is there, that's a fact, but diversity can actually be used as a strength of BRICS, and it requires very adaptive behavior, to adapt to a quickly changing world, to find ways of finding mutual interest, of promoting mutual interest, because the G7, yes, they have a common denominator. They have demonstrated their capability to do so, to work together. BRICS has to do that, and maybe would, but it has to be very adaptive.
Thank you so much, Pavel, for being with us.
Yes.
Daniel, What do you think of the resilience of BRICS compared with the G7 in the context of whether we are able to share the same values, same belief, or political institutions? Of course, here is the issue of diversity, but will that be a curse or a blessing?
I think it's worth remembering that the BRICS, with the full BRICS with South Africa, it has only 6 years. And if you think about what BRICS has accomplished so far, it's a lot, in my point of view, because it's not only the new developed bank, but also more than 30 areas of political coordination. So I think it's another arrangement that we have. It's different from the G7 that is specifically focused on economy and financial aspect. So I think the BRICS is dealing more about cultural aspects with development, investments, technology, access to food security aspect. So maybe thinking about that way, I think BRICS has a good point to show that we can have groupings with other arrangements functioning together in the global order.
Professor Nalapal, do you see more competition than coordination within the framework of BRICS? Therefore, we have more challenges instead of opportunities to use the relevance of BRICS and move forward in shaping the new world economic outlook.
Well, I'd like to say that competition is not harmful. Competition will benefit domestic talent. It will benefit domestic industry. The fact of the matter is that we have to understand that essentially what you were saying in the beginning, we are actually outside the very cozy system that is established at Bretton Woods in the personality of the World Bank and the IMF and so many other institutions. These are basically still dominated by countries who do not dominate the world economy anymore and who frankly do not dominate world geopolitics anymore. I mean, there are people who say that, we can do reform from within. I don't believe that. I think, quite frankly, there have to be new institutions that are created that can be different from the existing institutions, because reform from within, in my opinion, is a hopeless task. The countries that have got dominance are not going to surrender it easily or at all. So I think BRICS is very, very important from that point of view. It is a core, and that way I would like to commend China for talking about this BRICS Plus. Now, Mexico is a very important component. I would say Indonesia similarly would be a very important component. And if you have a BRICS Plus format of countries that broadly share the same geopolitical vision of an economic and global order which is not dominated by any bloc, I think that's important. I again want to repeat, we are meeting, BRICS is meeting in Xiamen. Xiamen is in China. And Chinese characteristic is not domination, not primacy, but an assumption of equality and harmony. I think that message is very, very important. So BRICS will have that message. The G7, let's not forget, is a G7 to continue the domination of the G7 on the rest of the world. I don't believe that's the intention of BRICS at all.
It seems that some of the interesting regional blocs are facing the urgency of enlargement, and BRICS is no exception. Shanghai Cooperation Organization has recruited India and Pakistan in its latest round of enlargement. What about the idea of BRICS Plus? Do you think the idea of BRICS Plus will be more representative in an age of globalization when other economies are catching up very quickly? For example, Indonesia, which boasts of the largest Muslim population.
I believe that if BRICS wants to represent and be a voice for the developing world, we have to include more countries if they want to. But I think we have to have in mind that we can't lose focus on our perspectives of political coordination. So at the same time that we have to be receptive to other countries and other ideas, we have to have in mind that this is the BRICS organization, and that if we, if we start including a lot of countries, it's going to be more like a small UN than the BRICS itself.
Well, thank you so much for being part of this meaningful dialogue about the future of BRICS. Xiamen, the host city of BRICS, is actually known for being the home of some of the Chinese biggest piano players. And therefore, Peter Tchaikovsky's music contests were held many times in this special city. And music is one of the universal languages that could cement different economies despite the cultural diversity. And we hope the success of BRICS in Xiamen will indicate more dynamics of globalization, with China and India playing a major role. I will see you next time.